Now, in session two, we're really going to get into deep into how do you make sense of the story in the data, and is there such a thing as too much data? Is real-time data useful or harmful? We've already heard from Johnny and Joel about how those 50 slide decks are of no use to anybody, and you do need an analyst who can say, okay, guys, enough information. Now let's really move on to the insights. With that, I'd like to welcome our speakers for this session. We are very lucky to have such a great lineup of speakers for this session. First, I'd like to introduce Payeng. She's the lead economist and data scientist for APAC, LinkedIn APAC. Welcome, Payeng.
Thanks, great to be here.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for joining us on this session. Next, we have with us Aseem Sood. He is CEO, Impact Research and Measurement Private Limited, and also board member of AMIC, or as some of you would already know, it's the International Measurement and Evaluation Association for Communication, AMIC. It's really the apex body for measurement and communication. Welcome, Aseem.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And last but not the least, we have with us Hin Yan Wong, who is SVP Strategic Planning and Intelligence with Weber Shandwick. And thank you so much, Hin Yan, for joining us at this. We did lose a speaker due to COVID earlier in the week, so thank you for stepping in. She's ill. She's unwell. So welcome to you, Hin Yan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
So here we go. I think some of the points which were raised in the earlier session as well. It was really how should and Valerie also made this point that there is a sort of a perpetual lack of communication between the data analysts and people who use the data in a simplified way or in a way that tells stories. They don't often understand each other's language. So over to you first, Payeng. How do you think data analysts can really convey the information in a way? What is it that your role? What are you trying to do with that information that's very important for the communicator or the marketer or the policy maker to understand?
Yeah, thanks. And that's a great question. So I think one of the very important things is to understand your audience, understand where they're coming from, what kind of background knowledge, contextual knowledge they might have. If you're not sure, you can always ask, but never assume that someone knows the background or knows what you're talking about, because that's just that's not always the case. So in terms of communicating data or communicating research findings that you might have, I think the most important thing really is to make sure whoever you're talking to has the necessary information to understand the context in which you are describing the data.
Thank you so much. Understand the context, similar to what, building on what the session was mentioned in the session earlier, that do not assume do not assume that everybody understands the context of where you're coming from. Over to Aseem and Hin Yan now for the same question. Aseem, what is your opinion? Do you often find in your communication that perhaps the language being spoken is different at each end?
Thank you. For us, we normally step in when we are trying to help our clients in measuring the impact of the work that they are doing. And in doing so, what we find is most of our clients have clarity on their objectives. What we need to do then is we need to step in and help them identify the right metrics that they should be using to measure their campaigns. These metrics are very important because they also form a part of the language that you use to talk to the leaders in the organization. So are you using the output metrics? Are you using the outcome metrics? Are you using the business metrics? The choice of metrics becomes very, very important. And this is what we do when we step into an engagement with a client and help them identify those right metrics, again, on the basis of the objectives that they've set for themselves and the context that they're working in.
Thank you so much. The metric is what, the right metric, not just any metric, is what you need to communicate. Hinian, what is your view on this very important thing of conversing with the client?
I think obviously what we have just said, I think around objectives and around the metrics are absolutely key. But also sometimes we need to understand, from a client perspective or even colleagues' perspective, kind of their point of view as well. Because quite often in communications, there are those who are more numerate, literate, and they're more words people. And sometimes they may not even speak the same language. So I think at the outset is asking the questions around objectives, context, and also be able to understand where they are coming from. And that really help us build that communication bridge. Because otherwise it will be one party speaking numbers, the other party speaking words, and they are actually not talking to each other. So I think having that level of understanding, that mutual understanding is important.
That's that's actually very important. What you just said, numbers versus words. No one is better, but they should understand each other. Excuse me. So my next question is that can application of data be automated in narratives? There could be a feeling that data at scale is not it's not possible to automate it for something like communication. What is your view on this, Pei Eng? And then I'll come to Hinian and Asim.
So I think as with many things right now based on current technologies, automation is possible to a certain extent. But the final mile usually does require some customization, some manual intervention, adjusting of languages, adjusting of objectives, so that adjusting of the language so that it meets the objective of what the communication is meant to do. But I'm only speaking from my perspectives of current technology. This may very well change in the future, and I also do believe that as a lot of natural language processing and other technologies develop in the future, there will also be room for certain types of communications to be automated much more.
That's interesting. Hinian, what is your view on this?
I think automation plays an important role even today. I think as Pei Eng is saying, technologies is constantly moving. And what we do find is that when we're dealing with a very large volume of data, so some of the work that we do spans 10, 20, 30 markets in 10, 20, 30 languages. And therefore, it is actually humanly not possible to digest everything. But the automation tools allow us to actually see which are the trends, whether time has an impact on what is going on, whether particular topics are spiking in some markets and not other markets. And going back to what Johnny said earlier about looking back, looking forward, I think some of these automation allows us to see that trend so that we can anticipate what is coming. So, I mean, one that we found quite a few months ago, actually about a year ago, one pattern emerged was when major leaders announced their net zero commitments, you suddenly just see the huge spike across all markets that everybody is talking about it. And that tells us something about, well, is this going to continue or is it going to die down? Now, we don't have a crystal ball, but some of these automation tools will allow us to see what could be happening. And that's where some of the human insight, your human understanding of the cultural context and maybe the geopolitical context will help us make sense of that. But automation goes some way to help digest that volume of information.
Thank you so much. When you're looking at large amounts of data, it's very important to have an automated system. Asim, over to you. The same question.
Right. I'll provide the service provider perspective. There have been huge advancements in technology because of which data is available completely automated. Johnny talked about some of the tools. One of the tools he mentioned was TalkWalker. You'll be surprised that even we as analysts use TalkWalker. So TalkWalker is one of our official partners. Now, data is very easily available, but before it can be taken into or digested into a project, there are two activities that you need to do. One is what we call a data cleanup. And this is something that only we can do manually. Data cleanup cannot be done in an automated fashion. And second is making sense of that data in line with the problem that you're trying to solve. And this is something, again, that requires human intervention. So to answer your question, data is available in an automated fashion from multiple sources. In fact, the challenge that we face is the opposite. The challenge that we face is there is too much data available. There is so much data available that you don't know what to look at, what to drop. There are times when we actually advise our clients on what to drop rather than what to pick up, because they already have access to so much data. A lot of our clients come to us and say, we have all these sources available, but now how do we make sense of all this data for our campaign?
That brings me to a follow-up question before I come back to our other two speakers. We discussed this before we were setting up this session, Aseem, but when is real-time data useful and when is it not?
Okay, so first I'll tell you a story. So, we are in the business of news analysis, and there was a time when we used to do counting of clips manually, counting of articles manually, and suddenly we had a lot of this technology available to us, and this technology allowed us to give a lot of charts, data, dashboards in real time to our clients. So we actually took this easy way out and said, oh, we have this technology available, let's push all this to our clients. And we started giving real-time data to our clients. Initially, it looked very good because we would walk into any office and there'll be a 4x4 setup of computer screens, which will have all these dashboards, everything changing by the second. And within a few months, we realized that this was causing more harm than benefit. The reason I say this is because real-time dashboards are only useful in specific situations. It's only useful when you're managing a crisis. It's only useful when you're managing execution of a campaign on a day-to-day basis. But when real-time dashboards are shown to leadership, people who are working on strategic problems, then these tend to be harmful because people tend to take decisions which should not be taken looking at a short duration data point. So suddenly I step into the office and see, oh, there is a 3% fall in the volume of conversations that we have on Twitter suddenly. And as a leader, I start thinking, oh, something needs to be done to correct it. Whereas that's not how public relations campaigns are run, because you're looking at changing outcomes over a period of time. Therefore, you need to increase the time frame and then look at the analysis. So most of the time, real-time dashboards are more harmful than being useful. But we have a lot of case studies wherein during crisis, it becomes so much more important to look at these real-time dashboards and plan. And otherwise, we recommend our clients to stay away from real-time dashboards most of the time.
What is your opinion, Hinian? Do you also think that the use of the real-time dashboard should be customized?
I think I would agree with Aseem what he said around the fact that sometimes you need to take a step back because the real time actually becomes very noisy, and therefore you're not able to see the wood for the trees. I think for some clients, some business sectors where the sentiment or where the conversations are actually moving quite quickly, you need probably maybe not real time, but certainly in a much narrower time window. I think COVID is definitely one where if you have pharmaceutical clients, and then if you look at the situation of COVID, how it is affecting people, and you need to take almost like a weekly view to see how the how the conversations may be changing, where the focus is, before you can advise your client, perhaps, the topic needs to be in this direction or that direction. So I think for some topics, maybe not real time, but a shorter time window so that you can see the changes that is taking place. But I think absolutely in the case of crisis, and we also do a lot of that for our clients, is actually, doing it fairly real time, very fast turnaround so that we know if anything actually appears. Of course, a lot of time is we hope nothing happens, but having that real time data and knowing that the conversation has not evolved in a very negative way definitely will help us make our plan and make our counsel to our clients more effective.
Thank you. I'd like to come to my next question, which is that what do you all as data warriors, I'm going to call you data warriors, what are your biggest challenges when you are talking to a non-data audience and helping them understand the trends? I'd like to come to Priyank first for that. Since in your role, you basically do a lot of research on policy issues and the workforce as well. So over to you first. What are the challenges you face in positioning the data in a way that the other side understands?
Yeah, so I think this is actually a very, very interesting question, because there's two tensions going on here. There is one in which you want to make the data as easy to understand, as simple, as understandable, as direct as possible for whoever you're speaking to. But then there is also this other opposite. I'll call it, not, maybe it's not an opposite force, it's more like a separate tension, in which if things are too simple, sometimes it feels like it's just too simple. People don't take it as seriously because it's so simple. One example I like to use is not about data, but it's about code. So if anyone on this call is familiar with code, you know that actually the shortest codes that run efficiently are the most difficult to write, because it's very difficult to squeeze a lot of power into like 6 lines of code and make it run well. Whereas like something like 600 lines, it's very easy to write 600 lines of code and get something to work. But to people who are not familiar with this, to them, 600 lines of code is impressive. 6 lines of code, they're like, I could do that. It's only 6 lines. But yeah, it's one of those things that I think we struggle with sometimes when we're communicating, because we do spend a lot of effort dissecting and distilling huge amounts of information into very, 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 very concise, very, very concrete points, so that we can get that across to whoever we're talking to. But then because we've done so much to distill it, to simplify it, it then sometimes I think the other party sometimes feels like it's not enough. There hasn't been enough information done, and that's where some of the challenges come in trying to explain the process and how it is.
That's actually a very important. That's a very important point that you made. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, beautiful code can be 6 lines, but you often face that in journalism in a different way, where you can turn around a news story in 10 minutes, and then somebody would say, but you took only 10 minutes, so why should I pay you X amount? And you're like, I can do it in 10 minutes because of my skill for 25 years in journalism. So it's almost exactly the same thing. Sometimes these things are not valued in the same way. Aseem, over to you, and then back to Hinyan. What are your biggest challenges in communicating data? You already mentioned some of it earlier. Spotting the right metric, making them understand that it's too much data. Don't look at that. But what else?
Okay, I would like to talk about 2 challenges. The first is the challenge that we face when we start an engagement with the client. As you know, there is a lot of data out there. So for most of the projects that we work on, we tend to take a sampling approach. So we do a qualitative analysis of a small sample of the data, and then we try and use it to represent the entire data that we have. Now, to convince clients that the sample that we have chosen, that is chosen scientifically, is a good representative sample of the entire population, is one of the biggest challenges that we face when we're working, or rather starting a campaign. The second challenge that we face most of the time is towards the end of the campaign, when we start presenting some initial findings to the client and we show them what all is available. So there is a lot of data available, and we try and show them what all is available. And we present some cuts to the clients, and suddenly the clients see, oh, wow, all this is possible. So now they start asking us for additional cuts. So now they say, okay, can you do a comparison of this with this? And can you link this to this? And so a lot of these requests start coming in. And that's where we have developed something that we call a usefulness test. So whenever we receive a request for a specific cut, we ask a client, can you tell us, if we were to present this cut to you, would it mean that there's something is going to change in what you're going to do? Is it going to help you take a decision? It is going to help you evaluate something? If the answer to these questions is no, it's not going to help us do any of that, then we tell them that we should not focus on this cut. So these demands towards the end, typically when clients ask for too many cuts, is the second challenge that we face a lot of times.
Do a usefulness test, put up a usefulness quotient before you, ask for too many data sets, do some self-insight before you just demand different data cuts. Hinian, what are your biggest challenges when you deal with and you work with a lot of very big brands? So how do you communicate with them? What are your challenges?
I think very often I will pose the question from the client's perspective. So what? So you've got this data, you've got all these insights, you've got these very beautifully distilled ideas. So what for the client? I think this is a very important question that we have to ask and we have to answer, because I think it's not dissimilar to what Asim said around the usefulness test. When you present data, when you present insights derived from data, you present findings, then the natural question for the client is, well, what can I do with it? And the so what question comes in. And this is kind of where the magic should begin to happen, because you now have this data, this insight that you think, well, okay, the audience is talking about this, or that topic is actually, is actually well aligned to what we want to talk about. Then is the next step of, right, so client, this is what you could be doing. This is where we begin to explore options. So the data is actually almost for that conversation, is a starting point to then explore the options that the client could take to move to the next phase. So I think a really good test of that dialogue is whether the so what question is answered.
So what, if I were to just recap what all of you have said, think of the so what question, think of the usefulness question. These are like two extremely important points. Think that 6 lines of code is not worse than a 600 line of code. So these are the takeaways for the challenges. One last question before we open it up to the audience, and I can see there are already questions coming in for all of you. Starting with Piyeng, my last question is this: that for the audience here, for them, it's very important to use data in a way which really touches the audience, appeals to them in the heart. And in India, the Indian film industry, popularly called Bollywood, and politicians are actually specifically good at touching mass audiences of literally in millions, and they're able to do that really well. But for our communicators here, for brands, it's not that easy to do emotional storytelling at scale using good quality data. So is that possible, Piyeng, from your perspective? Because policy changes also require some amount of empathy for what the new policy should be like. So is it possible to use data to strike an emotional note at scale?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. One thing I always encourage people who are using data for communications or who are doing analysis, doing data storytelling, one thing I always encourage them to do is to look at the data with an open mind. Go in not with a preconceived idea of what you would want to tell, but with an idea of, I'm going to use this data and I'm going to think about what I could do with it and what I could say with it, and what kinds of stories, what kinds of narratives could come out of that, because that then creates, in that exercise, it forces whoever's doing this to think about the so whats, right? And think about what am I trying to see here? What do I see? How do I feel about this? And that, I think that really empowers people to tell a much more touching, tell a much more compelling story when they go in with an open mind, rather than going in wanting to have specific data points to support something that they had a preconceived notion about.
That's so if there's a confirmation bias, which Johnny talked about in the first session, keep an open mind, you'll find the heart of the story, which will touch the heart of your consumers. So with that rather cheesy line, over to Hin Yan for his opinion on this whole aspect of emotional data storytelling at scale.
Around the fact that we have at our disposal tools that can analyze the sentiments of earned media and social media conversations. And but we still need that human insight to understand what is causing those extremes, positive, negative, and then to be able to come back to, right, okay, so we can shape our message in a way that we think will give us that emotional connection. I think that's one way of looking at it. And of course, I think as Pei Ying was saying, the tools are emerging, and we are seeing some of our tools being able to give us kind of the next level of emotions around joy, anger, anxiety, and so on. And those are also very useful ways for us to understand which are the topics that could be causing these emotions. And then as communicators, how do we use that intelligence to shape our communication to arouse that emotion?
Thank you. Over to Aseem for his last words. And thank you, Hin Yan, for recapping it for us. Thank you so much. Aseem, over to you.
All right, I'll approach it slightly differently from the measurement angle. In June of 2021, we at AMEC, the Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communication, we launched our latest integrated evaluation framework. In this framework, what we've done is we've put the metrics into three parts. The first is the outputs, second is the outtakes, and the third is the outcomes. And in very simple words, what this means is outputs help you measure what you can see. Outtakes help you measure what the consumers are thinking or feeling. And outcomes help you measure the actions of the consumers or the stakeholders. So to answer your question, yes, it is possible to use data for this purpose. And I actually welcome all of you to visit the AMEC website and look at the integrated evaluation framework. It's a framework which is free to use and answers a lot of these questions that we're talking about.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all of you. I'm just going to throw the floor open for questions. And the first question I have, and maybe Aseem and Hin Yan can look at that first. The question is from Saurabh Das from Sempor. He asks, is there such a thing as over-reliance on data for storytelling? So a simple question, at what point do you draw the line?
The only thing I can say is we need to marry the application of data with common sense. And that's the best way to measure whether you're overdoing it or you're doing it right.
Yes, it's
and I would agree. Yeah, I would agree that there's a common sense approach to this, in that there's so much data available and you can spend a lot of time and effort to do the analysis. But you know, and it needs to, the common sense part sometimes is a very simple of cost benefit analysis. By expending another day of analysis on the data, are we going to get another day's value of insight to help solve our clients' problems? And of course, you know, if you're running a multinational major campaign on a very important product launch, then perhaps you want to invest more effort to make sure that your communications is informed by data and intelligence. But if it is something of a, let's say it's a citywide campaign for a very niche audience, then, and the value of the product may be of a mass market product, then there's a question of you only can go so far, and the marginal return will begin to decrease. And in which case you just have to say, actually, I think we work with what we have. And there are times when you can't squeeze any more out of the data because that's what it is. So I think that pragmatism, that common sense approach is absolutely key.
Absolutely. And over to Pink, you're okay with answering this question,
Yeah.
right? Sorry,
Yes,
just
yes,
sorry.
no.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Would you also like to?
So I think, sorry, what did you say?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So I think you know, definitely. And what's been covered earlier during this conversation is very, very relevant as well, right? So Hin Yen and Asim both talked about the importance to not just collect and use all the data, but to really curate, narrow down, prioritize, think very carefully about what you're going to do with it. And I think that's where a lot of, I think that's, in my opinion, in my very honest opinion, one of the most difficult parts of working with data is deciding what to do. Because it's very easy to work with data, but it's very difficult to decide what to do, to decide what data you're going to use, to decide what metric you're going to calculate, and then to decide how you're going to, what you're going to do with the results of the analysis after that. I think that's a series of questions that people need to ask themselves.
That's really interesting. I have another question now coming in from Bhaskar. Bhaskar, I'm not sure I understand your question. He's asking that what do you do with offbeat conversations that arrive in the data analytics? Could you explain what you mean for that?
Sure. Thank you so much, Parul. This is indeed insightful. Thank you so much, Hin Yen, Asim, Pei Yang. My question was something very specific about research that we do. So I lead strategy and business development for India, and often when we come across this, when we put the billions on the measurement tool, we anytime deal with minimum of 10,000 plus articles, right? And we spoke about decisiveness, in fact, in the last conversation, and now there are some conversations that we can clearly demarcate from the trend that we see. Like, there are some 2 or 3 or 5 conversations that very clearly comes out. But there are sometimes, like, in most of the kind of the data which we draw, there are some offbeat conversations. Those are unique conversations, but they do not have a very good outreach in terms of the reach volume per se, right? They are not making enough buzz, but they are very unique sort of a conversation, which we might see a potential going back in the future. So when we are developing the framework for the client, when we are going for the pitch, is there any methodology, is there any principle of choosing those conversations? And how would we decide that? Because those are not really those conversations that are topping in volumes. And clearly we don't see it as trend at this point of time. So is there any way if we can decide or what weightage to give on those kind of conversations?
That's a very, very specific question. I don't know how much you all can get into.
Hin Yen, I'm sure you must be dealing with this every time.
So that is a very interesting question, and in fact something that I can draw out in actually session 3. Mm-hmm. But not to preempt too much what we'll talk about in session 3. I think when you have outliers, it's definitely worth exploring, and you can use your same tool that you're using to explore those outliers where they're going. I think that's a good place to start. Another place to start actually is to use another tool, maybe to look at how that topic may be manifesting itself. And I would even say, very boring, actually, what these guys are talking about in the outlier, and if you just literally drop into Google to see what actually comes back, because sometimes our tools can go so far to make sense of a lot of these conversations, and there is always a herd instinct. There's always the echo chamber effect that all the people are in the same room talking about the same things. But where you have outliers, it's definitely worth investigating. You also have to apply common sense, because if based on your assessment it's definitely rubbish, then you can just leave it as that. But you think, is there merit in this concept? Is that merit in this angle of the conversation? That's where when you can do a little bit more broader search, because no tool I've come across is fully comprehensive. So there will be pockets or blind spot that these tools develop. So Google is not a bad way to give you the extra sense check. And later on, I'll talk a little bit around how sometimes when some outlier concept emerges, how we can turn that into something that becomes a client's advice. And I'm not sure whether Pei Ying and Asim have any to add to that.
I would love to. So whenever we use data for planning purpose, there is a stage wherein we prioritize all the research ideas and messages. And imagine a 2x2 box wherein on one axis we have popularity, on the other axis we have potential impact on business. And if you were to map all these research results on this 2x2 matrix, it'll help you prioritize which are the issues that you need to pick up for your planning exercise. So if the importance to impact on business is very high, but popularity is low, you may still want to prepare for it. So you'll do a scenario exercise wherein you think about what possibly could be done if such an issue was to arise later on in the future and become more popular.
Thank you.
Sure.
Pei Ying, over
would
to
you
you
like
for the
to-
last word.
So yeah, thanks. I was also going to add to that to say, like, I do think there is room for a healthy mix of a certain percentage of highly popular things and maybe like a smaller percentage of niche, maybe conversations that are more niche or conversations that are not yet trending. Because if my opinion is that if every single thing you post always trends, either you are really, really good, or you're just picking topics that are already trending, therefore you are trending. And you are following a trend and you're not creating it.